Welcome, everybody, to the Paranormal Council. It is so good to see you guys already popping in the chat. Guys, we have a very special show just because we have a special guest here with us tonight, filling in for Sean, and she is, part of our council now. We have now adopted her, Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz. How are you?
I'm good. How are you tonight?
We're awesome. And guys, we are going to be talking about have you ever put your keys somewhere and then all of a sudden you go back to grab them and they're not there, and you look all around, you're like, what the heck? And then your keys reappear in the same place later on or another place. Or anyways, we're going to talk about that phenomenon today, sometimes referred to as JOTT Phenomenon, or apportation. So we're going to get into it, but first, real quick, let's talk with Dr. Schutz and let's find out. Let's get to know her just a little bit, just so the people that are watching get to know a little bit about her. So, what can you tell us about yourself? I know about you, but
Well, Josh and I met at a conference last year, and that's how we became acquainted. And I'm not going to. My bio is very, very long, so if you ever need some good sleeping material, go ahead and look at my website. But just to give you the short and skinny on me, I have had over 100 plus what I believe to be paranormal experiences, because now I'm beginning to question some of those, and 3 to 4 believed perhaps extraterrestrial visitations and or encounters. And so this has been happening to me since I was age 3. Of course, at that age, you don't know what's going on. And as my building blocks of life unfolded, I began to recognize and realize that I have all the clairs, and that they've come to me in different ways during different stages of my life, and also different things that have happened. But again, if you're interested and know more about me, go to my Facebook page, or I'm just going to give the website right now, www.paranormaluniversalpress.com, and I think you're going to have quite a bit to read. So
awesome. Yes, and like I said, folks, and it's okay if we refer to you as Kelly tonight.
yeah.
Okay, so but she's got an impressive resume, just like the rest of the council. We've been doing this stuff for years, and as you guys know, we bring a lot to the table. Okay, so let's get in without further ado. I'm excited about tonight's subject. Again, just the one of the persons that tackled this was a woman named Mary Rose Barrington, who wrote a book called JOTT, and stands for just one of those things. And it's JOTT Phenomenon. And so she goes in a lot of theory and things like that. So you definitely want to check out the book. But one of the things is she does categorize these things into 6 categories roughly, right? So she did over 180 cases, documented over 180 cases, and stuck these, like I said, was able to classify these in about 6 categories. So I'm going to walk you through these categories real quick, and then we're going to dive into it, because I'm pretty sure those of you watching probably have experienced one or multiple of these. Okay, so first category, walkabout. This is when an object disappears from its known location and is later found in another place. Okay, turn up, or jot in. Turn up is a known object, often from an uncertain location, suddenly appears in a place where it was known not to have been before.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Come back. A known object disappears from its usual or known place and subsequently returns to that same place. All right, we're going to get into some examples. We're going to talk about some of this stuff. Fly away. A known object that disappears permanently and is never seen again. Okay? So have you ever dropped something to never, ever find it again? Yeah. Anyways, windfall. It's an object of unknown origin that appears in a location where it could not have been previously. I've had that happen to me, actually. Trade-in. And it's a personally known object that disappears and is replaced by a similar object of unknown origin. So that's very interesting. So now that you guys know some of the categories. I'm sure some of you out there can relate to one or multiple of those when you think back in your life. Now, we're not going to get so much into her book and theories and stuff like that. Let's just say we can really get into some quantum discussion on this. But I'm going to let Dr. Schutz start first because this is a subject that she kind of brought up to our attention. Said, not enough people talk about this. So, Doctor, what can you tell us about your perspective on the JOTT phenomenon?
Well, I think that it's really hard to put a finger on anything because of all the categories that you just talked about or the theories behind her what she had in her book. I could literally say yes to probably maybe five or the one that was most interesting to me was the one where something is actually being replaced with something else. That's kind of interesting because I haven't experienced that, but I've experienced all the other ones. And I'll just give you a brief example where I came to recognize that, well, I became to question out of curiosity, what exactly was I experiencing? So I'll give you a quick example. I was up in my office in my house in a former home. And I ran downstairs for the moment, and I told my husband that I had to run out to the store or something like that. And when I went back upstairs, I remembered that I left my, those neck pouches that you wear for a passport, and then you tuck them inside your shirt. I always wear one. They're just very easy and convenient for me. And I said, "Oh darn! I left my pouch upstairs." So I ran back upstairs, and it was gone. And I thought, this is very weird because it's just him and me. He was downstairs. There's no reason for it to disappear. Yes, I remember bringing it up there. And guess where I found? Well, we went through the whole house to figure out if we could find it. And where we found it is when we went back upstairs. We found it underneath my desk chair, which I had a very large blanket over the seat that covered the floor, but the string of the neck was just barely sticking out of the blanket. And I said, what the, and how did that, because it was just him and me, and that was very, very odd. And then I started to question because the house was very haunted, and I seem to have that effect on houses. I bring in hauntings, but that's where it began for me, for questioning what on earth did that? How did that happen? How did it end up underneath there? But just enough of a hint to for me to find it, and then of course run to the store. So that's kind of where it began for me. I'm curious about this sort of thing. This isn't the first rodeo. I've had many things disappear and reappear. So I'm glad this gal wrote a book about it because, but that last one's really interesting. If anyone has any example, please write in the comments because I would be very interested to hear what your item was replaced with. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I had that one. It seems like there was something, but I mean, when you read through these categories, it's like I know for a fact there was times that I had keys that, I set my car keys. And see, I'm a very ritualistic person when it comes to my stuff. Like I set my keys. I have like even like a little thing. I keep my keys and wallet and all this stuff in a certain place. And if I do set it down, then there's a few alternate landing spots. Well, if I'm all of a sudden missing my keys and they're not in any of those spots, then I start to panic because I'm like, oh man, what the heck? Because I'm very ritualistic on it. I don't normally set them down anywhere else, whatever. So I start checking things. And then when I find them in some weird spot, then I'm like, I don't ever remember putting these here, period. Like, there's no way. Like, how in the hell did this happen? Because there's no way that these keys were here. But I'll let others talk if they want. Stacy or Jen, if you want to chime in on your thoughts on this.
Well, in the traditional in Santeria or in Palomayo Bay, it's very common in that kind of a household. Elegua or Ishu is a trickster spirit who's not trickster as in like demonic or poltergeisty, but more of that of a small child. And he likes to play with things that children like to play with, which is like keys, things that jingle, things that are shiny. Um, and he will often hide things because he thinks it's absolutely hilarious that people get upset that they can't find their shit.
Yeah.
So he likes to hide things just to make you upset when you're at the point where you're under pressure, because that is the most hilarious thing in the world to him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the kind of things that, disappear and then reappeared in the same spot, it was almost like they were cloaked. That's actually a phenomenon that's associated with matrixing. The brain has very little actual processing power, and it receives a lot of information all the time. So it tries to basically shortcut the processing of what's going on, especially if you're deep in thought on a lot of different things. Your environment, the things that you see, is kind of frozen in your brain of what is actually there. And like a browser where you have to hit refresh, it won't actually see anything new in that spot until you actually pause for a second and actually just let your brain hit that refresh button. And then suddenly you can see new things. Like you set down the keys in a new spot that you didn't really, mean to do, even though that you looked at that exact same spot 2 minutes earlier and the keys weren't there. Your brain hasn't refreshed the new information yet. So it's essentially cloaked. And by allowing your brain to actually take in new information outside of the intense focused processing that you happen to be in the middle of, you can suddenly see things that weren't there before are suddenly in your line of view. And to give an example, right now as we speak, in your field of view is your nose. But when was the last time you actually looked at it? Your brain deletes that extra information because it's superfluous. It doesn't need that information in order to move forward on anything. So it deletes it from your field of view, even though that it is in your field of view. That kind of thing happens all the time with, especially under high stress when you're thinking about other things, your keys get set down. It's not really paranormal in that sense, but other things that were described here by Josh very well could be. And, on quantum science is actually proving a lot of that too. Things suddenly appearing in existence out of nowhere in actual lab controlled environments where they've shielded all energy from a particular room for electromagnetic, and it's basically a dark room that is a vault. And suddenly, out of nowhere, photons will appear, blink on and blink off in a room that is completely hermetically sealed from all forms of energy. Things suddenly just appear. At the quantum level, it's not only possible, it does happen. They've recorded it. So how the paranormal actually manufactures that or manifests that, who knows? That's the mystery here.
Yeah, I mean, I have had that happen. What Kelly was talking about, where items get traded out. While I was married, I always would put my wedding ring in the same place, and I will never forget the one day I went to go put it on, and that ring was no longer there, and it was replaced with a ring that I had previously worn that I always called my decoy ring. Right? And it was when I was single, I would wear this ring because it seemed to ward off some of the guys that had no good intentions. And but that ring had been put away for a very, very long time. And to the point that I didn't even know where it was anymore. So how it ended up on my ring holder next to my sink, and my other one was in its place in storage. It made no sense to me whatsoever. But of course, that must have been a sign of the relationship at the time, since that is now an ex marriage. And it was just letting me know to get it out and get used to it again, I guess. But you know, this is a very interesting topic, very interesting conversation. I've had a number of conversations with people from different, you know, backgrounds and beliefs and experiences. And I have an aunt who's very much into fairies, and this happens to her all the time. And she blames it on the fairies every single time. I personally blame it on she's a little ADD. And most days she doesn't know her right from her left. But, you know, some people blame it on fairies. Some people blame it on brownies. That's a good one. I hear that one a lot. And, you know, it was funny listening to Kelly and Stacy talk. It reminded me of being a parent, right? We always used to say things in this household like, the kids would be like, I can't find my shoes. I can't find my pen. I can't find my notebook. And I'd say, well, it ain't lost until mama can't find it, right? But a lot of that was like what Stacy was talking about with, you know, you just have a different set of eyes. You have a different field of vision. You know, you're not pigeonholed into what you expect to be there. But, you know, there was also that whole concept of, I would tell them too, I'd be like, well, then just stop looking for it. You know, as soon as you stop looking for it, you're going to find it, right? The same thing Stacy was talking about. My kids they're down the hall right now. They're grown. They're down the hall. They're probably laughing right now going, yep, that's what mom says all the time. But, you know, it's funny how children experience this all the time. Adults experience it all the time. Sometimes it's, you know, just you forgot, you got busy, you had it in your hand. I can't tell you how many times I've had like my keys in my hand and gone looking for my keys, you know? It's just kind of one of those things. But how do you tell the difference? How do you know what's really that? Is it paranormal? Is it a fairy? Is it an energy thing? Is it a poltergeist that you're somehow creating because of your abilities? Right? And that's the question.
I'm going to jump in there and I'm going to add to your conversation, Jen, and see what you guys think of this. All right. So hopefully my guest from one of my shows is listening tonight, because she and I had a long conversation about things that suddenly just reappear and fall from like the ceiling. So I want to give you a couple examples on how on earth do we explain this. So I'm going to start with my husband's cousin, who was just standing in the kitchen one day in their house. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, a very small blue feather came floating down from the ceiling. And he put his cousin put his hand out, and it landed, of course, right into his hand. Now, they don't have birds in their house. They've never had birds in their house. And I'm sure they didn't have any feathers sitting up there waiting to fall down. But one of the ones that one of my guests talked about was coins dropping from the ceiling. And I've heard this actually two people now, one doing a CE5 experiment and asking for a sign where these jewels, believe it or not, jewels fell out of the sky and into the middle of their campfire area. And then this gal that I talked with, this guest, brought up coins. But what's interesting is the coins were not U.S. coins; they were German coins. And then what it did is it fell from the ceiling, and then it flung itself literally against the wall. And so she also has crocheted pieces, threads that show up periodically that she's not doing anything with, and it's like, what's this, you know? So there's these examples of when stuff just suddenly appears out of nowhere, and it's physically dropping right in front of you. I don't know. I know she had a category for that, but I can't remember which one that was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to really categorize each event. We just know that it's one of those. I would say, I know, okay, so here's one of my very specific ones that gave me chills the most. So I have an SB11 spirit box, and that spirit box, or I had anyways, and I left it at Nickerson Sneed. And so, I left it. It was legit. I left it because Rhonda Caudell had contacted me and said, hey, I think you left one of your devices. And I'm like, oh, okay. So she held onto it for like months or something. It took me for a while to get by there. I got it from her, and I had it, and I am really particular with my equipment. Usually I have it all put away and, things like that labeled, as far as like that I own it or whatever. But it went missing again. And then at this time I was married, so my ex-wife was blaming me. And she was like, you lost it again. You left it at, back wherever. And I'm like, I did not use it at those investigations, like on camera. Like I even went back to my footage to see what spirit box I used, or if I even used a spirit box. And I had not used it. I had not done anything with it. And we tore the house up. Like we tore the house up looking for this thing left and right. Literally like a year later, we're like completely clear out and overturn this one room, and we get done and we're just like, we're looking around and it's like, we didn't find anything like at all that I think we were looking for something else. Actually, we weren't even looking for the SP11. And literally we're both standing there at the door, and all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, look. And we looked right on her computer desk, and the SP11 has a little kickstand, and it was literally like sitting there on her desk with the kickstand. It was not there a second ago. Like we were both standing there, like, it was not there at all. We were looking around, and then all of a sudden it was there. And like, it's been missing for a year. We went through everything before. We were trying to find it legitimate. Like, I don't know, like things like that. I mean, the skeptical person would always have explanations for almost everything. But when you're there and you kind of know the situation, the circumstances, and like the environment, so to speak, and that there was, no way it was probably planted there. It's like, okay, what the hell happened?
Right. And it's kind of that question that we always ask, like when we're looking at any type of evidence, right? And we're like, okay, well, was it, EMF? Did somebody step on a creaky floorboard? We always try to debunk to the best of our abilities. And at the end of the day, we're just left with some piece of evidence that says we can't explain it. And therefore it's now paranormal because we can't explain it by what we already know. In situations like this, it's the same type of situation. It's like, we're not saying that it was paranormal or that it is this phenomenon or that it's created by various brownies, energies, teleportation, any of this stuff, right? But it's just simply, it's undefined. So then how do you go about setting up any type of experiment or investigation, or what sciences do you apply to try to kind of narrow it down and or define it? And if you do, are you then actually creating a bias of some kind, trying to make it stick in a box by something we already know, as opposed to just exploring it for what it is?
Yeah, and I agree with that. One of the things, especially when I went through my PhD program, and that's why skeptics are all, prove it, everything's prove it, it's hard to recreate sometimes a situation that you simply cannot explain, and they would normally probably raise up their hands. I'm going to add to that with another example. I was in Las Vegas at a musician, a very small theater where a musician was doing his act, and as the act was going on, the gentleman's son was in the area, but he was just kind of meandering and watching and doing what they all do, and he had a ring on his finger, and the ring just suddenly disappeared. Now, that was not part of the act. It wasn't meant to baffle people. He just said, "Where did my ring go?" They found the ring a couple months later up in the, those ceiling lights up there. We call them the mushroom, in our rooms. They had a ceiling light way up high in this building. and right at the ledge of the of that light was his ring. Now, someone would argue, oh, someone might have found that just as a practical joke because it's a magician's, situation that they put it up there and went, ha, ha, how did it get up there? Ooh, ooh, ooh. No, that wasn't the case at all. This area is very known to be very haunted, but he was genuinely like, where on earth did my ring go? And you hear this all the time with things being found in attics where they don't go up into their attic and there's a stash of stuff or this or that. I was in a haunted room just outside of Yosemite National Park at the Groveland Hotel, where the apparition in this room, which I didn't realize was in there until I got kicked up in the air and bouncing on the bed, he hid underneath apparently the bed, and he liked to take people's socks, and he also liked to take the television remotes because those things just intrigued him and bugged him. And so you couldn't get under the bed because it was like, really, the frame was really down towards the bottom. So you explain to everybody, or explain how on earth did these things end up under the bed when, another situation of being completely baffled by something that's just hard to explain. So I don't know. Good examples.
Sorry if I just coughed. I unmuted the cough, I think.
No, it's okay. You blew my ears out, but it's all right. I still have one.
I know. It's like I've been trying to mute in case I've been coughing because I've been, I've still got a little bit of a lingering cough occasionally. So, but okay. So one thing I want to dive into, because examples are great, and I got another one. I had a flyaway example where basically an object just, you don't see it again. But I wanted to kind of look at, so what's kind of interesting to me is, like with Mary Barrington, with her book and her theories, really dives into almost where you could really get into like the quantum physics of how everything is together. Like if you view everything as now again, I'm no quantum physicist, so I'm not even qualified to be talking about this, but I'm just trying to explain it the best I can. So, but like, the collection of a lump of atoms is us, right? Or whatever. Like every object is a lump of atoms. But if you look at every single thing is made of the same thing when it all is broken down to the smallest thing, right? So I think there was talk about basically how some of these objects would dematerialize as a whole, but then rematerialize later or in a different place or for some unknown reasons. But it was actually talking about dematerialization. Whereas Stacy was talking a little bit almost the reverse way of thinking of like the object was there, but it was your brain was sort of not registering it or not matrixing it, things like that. So it is kind of a two-way street on that. And I think both could be potentially true. I do, because, we do have this universe, which is made up of atoms and whatnot, and it's really interesting to see how we go from something like that where an object just materializes or moves to other places. Like, because I know for a fact there's things in my life that I knew for a fact. I'm like, there is no way I moved this object. There's no way I did this. Or I've had things show up in some of my stuff where I'm like, why is this in here? I never would have put this in my stuff. I never would put this in here. And nobody goes in my stuff, like in my certain things. Like it's one of those things where you just wonder what truly happened. So, on one hand, I do buy the fact that, yes, I think that Stacy makes a good point. And I think there is times when you're in that panic mode and you're overlooking something so obvious because your brain is just not registering that. And then at some point, almost like what Jen said, when she said like once you stop looking for it, and it's almost like your brain sort of relaxes, and then all of a sudden it's matrix that back there and there. But in some of these other cases that we're talking about, I feel like there's something else going on. And not only that, if you look at it on a molecular level, if you look at something complicated, right, like a box of matches, right, if an entire matchbook goes away, like I can understand certain molecules maybe fading in and out, but when you have an entire object that is complex and made up of a lot of that blueprint of all these molecules on that molecular level, that I don't know, it's interesting to me.
I want to add to that, or I want to move it to slightly to the right a little bit. Let's talk a little bit. I'm not an expert when it comes to vision, but I have heard enough about animals particularly have really good vision when it comes to seeing things that we cannot see. And I'll give you an example just to try to piggyback a little bit on Stacy and piggyback a little bit on you, Josh. So there's a gentleman I know who was looking out his window one day, and he was looking out at the tree line, and he didn't see anything. He just thought, I don't see anything. He took his infrared binoculars, he held them up, and lo and behold, what was floating above the tree line was, yes, a UFO craft. Now, brings the binoculars down, can't see it. Brings the binoculars back up, there it is. Okay, so the idea that, and I know Stacy, you're leaning on this a little bit, is the things do have a tendency to possibly cloak themselves, or maybe we have the ability to not see them, or maybe our vision can't see them. But I do know that animals, especially cats and dogs, but cats particularly, they do have really great vision to also see things that we cannot see. I don't know. Can anyone add to that?
Yeah, their light spectrum in cat's eyes is infrared. They can see heat. They know where hot things are. It helps them hunt at night to find mice and things. They can see the body temperature of rodents. They can hunt. Rodents can see in the dark, but they can't see very far. They have really bad near sight, so they have to kind of maneuver things differently. But cats have really good 20/20 vision in the heat spectrum. Um, bees actually see in the ultraviolet spectrum. That's how they're able to pick out certain flowers with certain colors the way that they are, because they have the highest amount of nectar inside those flowers. So they can see those evolutionary wise, they can see those flowers from miles away. And it's the infrared spectrum, or the ultraviolet spectrum is one of the most difficult to see, but honeybees specifically can see that. Now, the whole idea of seeing UFOs, yeah, that's a thing. They the CS5 people are all hot and heavy with getting binoculars with the infrared spectrum cameras, things of that kind, because you can see all kinds of things at night that you can't see even with regular telescopes. And the whole idea of the night vision goggles too, there's two different kinds. There's what we see in green, the green night vision, and then there's in Vietnam, which is where they first started using them, it's in the red spectrum. The soldiers, there's stories of soldiers, helicopter gunmen, who were using the infrared, the new night vision in the red spectrum, and they would see things in the treetops of Vietnam that were literally right out of oh God, what is the name of that? I just blanked out on the show.
Predator.
No. The TV show with the upside down. was on Netflix, and everybody watches it. The
Oh yeah, I don't watch Netflix.
what is that? Oh, she's watching something else. The basically
My kid in the other
11
room just said Stranger Things. So
Stranger Things. God, thank you. I can't believe I just forgot that. The creatures in Stranger Things were exactly what was described by these soldiers in Vietnam. Were jumping around from treetop to treetop, and the soldiers went nuts because they started shooting these things. They were shooting at them, and people who weren't wearing the goggles were going, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be shooting the ground. You're supposed to be shooting Viet Cong. You're not supposed to be shooting the treetops." And they would fly from treetop to treetop, these creatures, and the act of looking at them, being able to see them, allowed them to see you. So if you couldn't see them, they couldn't see you. But as soon as you acknowledged or could consciously see them, they could suddenly see you in return, and they would attack, which is why these soldiers were, you know, trying to shoot the treetops, because they kept trying to attack the helicopters and stuff. So the stories are like that on why the military moved from the red spectrum to the green. It's because in the green spectrum of night vision, you can't see those things. You can't see those creatures. So
well, that's an
as the
interesting
story goes.
example.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting example because I've actually had a lot of conversations with people who are in the hunt for Sasquatch. And they talk about his ability to cloak and how you can't see them with certain light. You can't see them with night vision. If you see them and they allow you to see them, there's some type of interaction, but there's requirements. Like there's all these different theories out there about this. And I've experienced some of it with my experiences, right? I don't know if there's necessarily a rule, but it's very interesting because we're talking about UFOs, we're talking about Sasquatch, we're talking about these military men, we're talking about the different vision, we're talking about animals that clearly have different biology and capabilities based on their own, physical characteristics, right? And even animals, I think they can sense things that aren't like things that we don't see necessarily. Like I've had animals that they know that urn, that box that looks nothing like an urn is an urn and it has their owner in it. And for months, every single day at the exact same time, they will go sit there by it. It's like, how do they know these things? And, the vision, are they seeing an apparition that we're not seeing? Are they picking up on an energy? Are they smelling something? How do they have these senses about these things? And like, how does that going back to things appearing and reappearing, right? This is just in our visual field. But is it paranormal? Is there a completely different type of paranormal with these things?
Well, and that's what that's what I was kind of going to get at here was, are we talking about two different things now? Because are we talking about vision stuff like cloaking? Because cloaking, really, all of this revolves around now consciousness. All right. If I leave my keys on the table, but they go somewhere else, okay, that requires consciousness for those keys to cloak themselves and move, right? So there's another question about consciousness in this too. So cloaking, I think, is a different subject, and I think for sure we probably could do a whole episode on UFOs, Bigfoot, cloaking, spectrum of light, and I would be totally down for that too. But I do think that in this case, we're talking about like JOTT Phenomenon, and I think the one thing about what Stacy was saying with cloaking, I do think for the one subject of the comeback where something is still in its place, that could be a potential that, again, our brain blocked that information because we were stressed and we didn't, and that was the one thing we really needed at the time. And, there's that possibility. And I feel like that's definitely a good possibility. But for some of these other subjects where objects are being replaced or moved, or and I'm going to use this example since I got the mic real quick, is a flyaway. So I had a situation where I dropped a shell casing in my bedroom. Okay. And so like literally I have completely cleaned and torn and looked everywhere for the shell casing. I cannot find it. I dropped it right there, and I went and I looked my everywhere. I've looked all under the bed. I don't have a very cluttered room. My floor is pretty simple to it's hardwood floor. It's very simple. Not a lot of stuff under my bed. And all that stuff I pulled out, I've looked completely. I cannot find this thing. I've looked inside things possibly where somehow it could have defied the law of gravity and went high, whatever. I looked in the window sills, the window ledges, the blinds, anywhere I could potentially think of. And to this day, I still cannot find this damn thing. So I feel like that is a situation of a flyaway situation. It is not physically there anymore. I don't know why, but it is not there at all. Okay.
Well, but Josh, that doesn't mean that it's not going to eventually show up sometime, or it might be in a place that you open up the kitchen cupboard, and next thing you know, there it is sitting next to your plate or whatever. And I've got one to add to that too. How do
if that happens, I'm calling all y'all and be like, we're having a show right now on this situation because if that damn case.
Now, how do you explain this one though? Two examples, kind of similar, not necessarily could have been a flyaway. You hear this all the time when people are reconstructing or renovating a house or a room or something like that, and if it's believed to be haunted in any way from something that may the energy of the past in some way. There was a situation too, actually, where someone had a saw, literally a saw, and it was down in the basement. But somehow, the minute that day they were going to start doing renovating work, guess where it ended up? It was outside in a bush, outside the house in a bush, hiding there. But that's not the only thing that ended up in the bush. A wedding dress ended up in the bush. Why that had a significance and why that all of a sudden went from one place all of a sudden outside was absolutely baffling and beyond anybody's wildest dreams here. So it kind of was a flyaway, except those were found in very unusual spots. Yours probably will show up sometime and you'll go, holy smokes, so
yeah, I think they call that when the object disappears from a known location is later found in another place. That's a walkabout.
Yeah.
And if the wedding dress was unknown, then that could have been a turnip.
Yep.
Or potentially a trade-in, but either way.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I want to interrupt for just a split second because this is probably going to be really funny.
Okay.
Josh, when did you lose that casing?
A year and a half ago, at least.
In that same room?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's in your dresser drawer because I found it when I was sweeping.
See? And that's the thing. It's like, but I have turned over that bedroom so many times. I mean, I literally went through I moved the entire dresser, cleaned, moved everything, swept the entire floor multiple times over the last year, or at least a year before I met Jen. And so that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
It was laying right in the middle of the floor in plain view.
See? And there's no way I've overlooked it for a year straight, plus with sweeping and mopping and all that shit. There's no way in hell. And that's what I'm saying. There's something to do with these things.
Yeah.
Hey, you're muted.
I said, Jen, you should have just tucked it in his underwear and not said a thing. That way you go and put them on, and all of a sudden they'd be like, whoa, hey, what is that?
If I had known they were missing, I promise you pranks would have happened. But I didn't realize he'd been looking for it for that long. Or, we could have had some fun.
Yeah. Can you imagine, though? But see, that's the thing, though. And the fact that she found it in the middle of the floor, and this is at least a year. easily a year had gone by of, again, sweeping, mopping, cleaning, looking for this damn thing. Because every time, and in my room, and Jen can tell you, there's not much in my room. I don't have a lot of clutter. It's hardwood floors. There's just not a lot to deal with. So, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, to me, those are, and of course, that would be probably a comeback or however you want to. It don't really matter what the subject of it is, but to me, this is what we're talking about. The whole these phenomenons, of something going missing for X amount of time and showing up in other places, things like that. I don't think it's just a matter of visual cloaking. There's no way my mind was cloaking this damn casing or physically escaping the broom or mop the entire time because it was cloaking itself. And if it was cloaking itself, then that means it has a consciousness and had made itself, permeable. Right? So then we have a whole nother discussion about inanimate objects and consciousness. But what about
what about animals? There's someone I know, their pet chihuahua or whatever was found way up at the top of a tree. They were looking everywhere for this dog. They thought it got out, and they're looking all over the neighborhood for it, only to find the thing literally a chihuahua way up into the top of a very tall tree. Bark, bark. Okay, so how did that thing get up there?
That's easy. That's the easy one. When it comes to animals and strange locations, that's aliens. When you find a cow up in the tree,
a cow,
or a chihuahua, it don't matter. Like when you find anything in a weird spot, that's because the aliens. That's where they just redeposit them.
But I agree with Stacy on the trickster theory, because I guess people tell me I'm a starseed, which means I attract young children, I attract ghost children, and have an effect on dogs. But one of the things that I know to be true about some of my experiences, I believe, have been because of a trickster child wanting to see my reaction, because usually my reaction is very dramatic and they just love that. And I learned that a long time ago too, about me and things gone missing, and then all of a sudden showing up. I'll give you a quick example here. Let's say, okay, I had a pill I was taking in the kitchen, gonna missed my mouth, it went flying. All right, disappeared, not on the floor, looked everywhere for it, everywhere. Okay, everywhere. A couple weeks later, we came home, my husband and I came home from a Christmas thing, and I turned the corner, and on my rooster rug, I kid you not, as God is my witness, on my rooster rug, right in front of the stove, something we've walked on a billion times, literally a billion times, there was my pill. It underneath the rooster's butt. I know it's a little graphic, but that's where it was. Was it laying a pill or that? My objection to them always taking my pills, because it's happened more than once, is I hope they're not licking them and then giving them back to me, but the thing is, yeah, I know. Oh, yuck, right? But how on earth could we not see that pill underneath that rooster's butt for weeks, 2 weeks later, and then all of a sudden there it is, nicely placed right on that rug right there? If anyone has, and again, trickster child is what was brought up to me. So love to see my reaction.
Well, real quick, and I'll let somebody respond to that too, but I had a similar situation too, because I had carpet in here originally, and then one day I went to go take my Viagra, and it fell and landed. Now I got hardwood floors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was just a dad joke.
But
all right. Anyways,
oh, we got it.
Yeah. So, but anyways, no, I honestly though, I think that I don't think it's necessarily just tricksters. I think that it could be even potentially some of your spirit guides, because I think sometimes there's lessons to be learned in that, whether you get those lessons right away or not. I think, sometimes maybe even hiding your keys, maybe even, certain things are a way to get you to stop and rethink some things sometimes and say, okay, maybe I need to slow down for a second. Maybe I need to take those moments in life. So that's just a little food for thought too.
Yeah, that's been known to happen too.
Yeah.
People lose their
Go ahead.
keys for 10 minutes, and if they had left the house when they did, they would have gotten into an accident.
Yeah.
So their guide and their protecting spirit essentially took them out of the equation for that period of time, because that window was potentially very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say this too. We've been talking about tricksters. In my experience working with different various negative entities in locations or attachments, even, some entry level possessions before, full mount. But in those situations, I have repeatedly come across negative entities that want to, make you fearful, use it as control, make you think you're crazy, make you have all this doubt and fear to make themselves stronger, to be more successful in their quest to possess you. And they will absolutely be what we would see as a trickster. And there is a lot of conversation too about children who aren't actually children, being disguised as children, but then it's equated to, oh, it's just a kid playing with the keys, and then it's like, wait, is it? It might be, it might not be, it might be something way bigger or way worse, but I have seen that happen a lot where, and it's not just the same thing, but they start to feel like they're losing their mind in a residential situation because everything is disappearing or it's showing up in a different place or it's not even theirs. And where did this come from? And but it's actually this entity intentionally trying to cause chaos and doubt and fear and disruption. So, I mean, it's hard to tell the difference. It's almost like you almost have to have this checklist every time something happens. Like, well, was it this? Was it that? Do we need to bring in, a psychic? Do we need to, or a medium, or do we need to get out equipment? How do you tell, or do we all just go?
Well, a lot of times when that happens, I'm not saying every time, but a lot of times when that happens, it's the spirit itself is looking for acknowledgement of some kind. A relative has passed recently, like within the year, and they're trying to get the attention of their relatives that they're still there and they're still doing things and they're still around. So they're basically messing with their own relative in the way that they know affects them the most, trying to get their attention. And once you acknowledge their existence and talk to them, essentially like you would talk to, Grandpa Joe, who's, the jokester or whatever, it suddenly stops because it's no longer, necessary. And that's all he was looking for in the first place, is acknowledgement. So,
yeah,
spirits, do things for a lot of different reasons, and it's not all malevolent.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jen. His name's Brian, and Josh knows a little bit about Brian. Brian passed a number of years ago, and he was the protector of pretty much everybody in the family in life. And it's actually become a very significant running joke because he visits multiple family members, typically right before something is going to happen. It's usually a warning or a get ready or a, hey, I'm here with you, you're not alone, that type of a message. But it has affected so many members of our family, most of whom saw him, his full-bodied apparition, at his own funeral on stage in front of everybody. But he is notorious. Every time he comes to visit somebody, you will find a dime. It doesn't matter. It might be in your shoe. It might be on your pillow. It might be underneath your glass that you use every night. And you have no idea where these dimes are coming from. The family members have actually started collecting them. And it's just that confirmation of, hey, Brian was here, right? And yes, in fact, this was Brian and not something else. Because how would every entity out there know that this is what Brian does and identify as Brian and do what Brian does, So yeah, no, absolutely. It can absolutely be family members just, trying to get your attention for whatever reason, whether it's a message or to say hello or wanting acknowledgement or whatever. And it's
I didn't know anything about Brian. I had no. She never told me anything about Brian or anything, and he decided to reach out to me.
Mhm.
Oh,
I had no idea, and then
Yep.
no,
And the next day I found the dime.
it's crazy. That's crazy. Uh,
mhm.
Mhm.
when things like that happen, it just makes you in awe of the paranormal field in general, and no matter how long you've been doing this, it's just amazing anytime you experience those moments. You know,
Mhm.
it really is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But on
But
that note, we will start to slowly wrap things up here as we get toward the end of the hour. And I think it's definitely been an interesting discussion. I definitely have loved this subject tonight because it is something that most of us has experienced in one way or the other.
Mhm.
And so the fact that we were able to sort of talk about it, discuss a little bit about the theories, I'm still more leaning toward what is the consciousness behind it? Because, I can accept the fact that on a visual scale, if you look at a piece of paper with like a painting, right? We see it as our consciousness, we see it as whatever that is, blues and greens and reds and all this stuff. But in the science scale, if you take away consciousness, all it sees is information, right? Just the same information, it's just the atoms all collected, a collection of all a clump of stuff, right? So how is that clump of stuff as one whole unit just disappear? Okay, versus maybe the red disappearing or blue or whatever, like a certain particle maybe, but for an entire complex thing to just disappear, to me, what's the consciousness behind it? There's got to be some kind of consciousness behind it. That's what I look at. So I accept the quantum physics behind stuff, and I understand that you can manipulate, something in one part of the world and it affects another part of the world quantum physics wise. I get that. I understand some of those things. But as an entire complex object that technically looks the same, you know, atom wise, how does that all decide that the exact composition of that object disappear and then reappear or rematerialize or whatever somewhere else or in a different state, things like that. And there is documented cases of all these different things. I would suggest for anybody to read the book. I have not read it. I had to do a quick cliff note version because in preparation of this, because I wanted to be kind of prepared because these are things that I've experienced and I wanted to know more. And of course, I've had these happen even with paranormal investigations, things that just go missing and then show back up later and stuff like that. So it's I would definitely recommend. Again, it's Mary Rose Barrington. I think the name of the book is JOTT or JOTT Phenomenon, one of the two. But look it up. I'm sure if you Google it, and I think she may even still be alive. I think she's still kicking. So it's not one of those books that was written in the 40s or something. Okay, I do know that. So and there, and I want to say she has got a ton of documented cases in there, theories. It's very interesting. I definitely looked at the summary of things, and I was really impressed by some stuff. So I personally want to read it when I get the time because I think it's really cool, especially with this type of subject.
I think it's interesting that right at the end, as we're winding down, you decide to bring up the whole concept of wormholes that are actually stable enough to
Right.
transfer full objects from one place to another.
Mhm.
As if we didn't have a whole nother hour to talk about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and again, we could look at that as well, but I just feel like there's got to be something conscious driving some of this. Now, whether you want to believe it's a trickster or a spirit guide or randomness in the universe, or if you want to go completely scientific, but I feel like again, when you go down the completely scientific route, it just there you have to acknowledge some type of consciousness at some point. because just on the surface level doesn't make sense that just these group of complex things will just all leave or whatever, and not just part of it or one of it, or whatever. So again, I really am fascinated by it. I'm going to give you guys a chance. Anybody wants to throw any last minute your final thoughts as well?
All right, I'll jump in first. First of all, thank you for having me on tonight. Very interesting talk, and I'm actually very glad we found that source. That's good. I'm glad. I think I'd like to read that book too. My thoughts will always lead to what exactly did we encounter here. It'll always be that, and anyone who has a perspective or belief system on anything will always gravitate towards what they feel strongly about. And so in my particular case, I'm always questioning if it's a spiritual, paranormal, otherworldly, the whole gamut. What did I just encounter here? Consciousness is very interesting, although I can't necessarily really, I wish I could just see for once, or maybe I don't want to see what just did something with the object, or maybe I had a moment that I just was burnt out and whatever, and couldn't tell what went on, but not in my cases. I can honestly tell you that they were definitely here, back there, whatever. And I would love to know if there's ever going to be a time when we can literally figure that out. So those are my 2 cents on where I'm standing on the subject.
Nice. Jen, Stacy, your final thoughts?
Well, my thoughts come back to the what they're discovering now. On the spirit side of things, we could go down a whole rabbit hole on ancient mysticism and things of that kind. I'm not going to do that here because the common vernacular on what people are learning about in quantum science is what they call coherence. Things that actually exist in quantum physics is in a coherent state. The position, the superposition of what any kind of informational quantum qubit can be, balances on that whole coherence decoherent state, meaning that it exists or it doesn't exist. The whole Schrodinger's cat thing comes into play because until you actually can see it, until you can actually consciously know it, it is either there or not there at the same time. That is, in quantum physics, the state of everything in the universe. Until you actually see it, the possibilities of what can actually be there all collapse into one possibility. But you need a consciousness in order to actually see it, in order for it to exist. Without that consciousness, not only does it not exist, but it exists everywhere at the same time in the quantum state. So the whole idea of what Josh was talking about with consciousness coming into play, science is really hitting what is consciousness very, very hard, especially in the world of AI. They don't know when AI is actually going to become conscious.
Yeah.
They do know that it can mimic consciousness really, really well, but is it conscious? They don't know because they haven't defined what is consciousness. But we do know that physics responds to consciousness. Whether AI actually reaches that point, probably won't know for a while. But things that appear, disappear, appear someplace else, very well could be a phenomenon where all that's really necessary when something is in its flux or in its superposition state, whether it be physical or not, can suddenly reappear someplace else with a informational upload or an informational input, to where like a pixel on your screen can suddenly be a different color than what it should be because the information that's receiving is unlike what it should be receiving. And you see it. You can honestly see, what is that dot on my screen? Because the information it's receiving is different than what it should be. And it's an anomaly on your computer screen, but in the physical world, we're not used to seeing that. So
in quantum physics, like, let me just jump in real quick. In quantum physics, isn't that when they talk about there's like that probability, and it's like one in like to the 60th power or something. Like it's like one in a trillion that a different result can happen. Like it's like the probability, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there's like this probability that, so it's like the probability of you suddenly being 1 foot off the ground. It's like one in 60th power or whatever. It's like one in a trillion chance, but they can never rule it out because in the quantum physics, there's like that, I guess, is that what you're kind of alluding to a little bit? Like there's that
Yes.
one little sliver of
Quantum science, quantum physics is essentially showing that life and the physical universe is really a probability engine. It doesn't really exist. It's where they get into this whole weird, bizarre thing with, like, we're living in a simulation, we're living in a hologram, because the math does not come out right to Newtonian physics anymore.
Mhm.
They've gotten so deep into it that quantum science or quantum physics really messed the whole thing up, because consciousness plays a really big part in whether anything actually does exist. And that consciousness, is it my consciousness, your consciousness, or the consciousness of some greater intelligence that is allowing this to exist? And in that, it can change its mind at any time.
Mhm.
And things that are here suddenly aren't here anymore.
Mhm.
It's both fascinating and scary at the same time.
Mhm.
But their science for quantum computers, they're finding out that this is very, very real, because they're trying to create what's known as a qubit, an informational matrix of uh, you know something that can be evaluated in superposition. It exists, it doesn't exist, and exists everywhere all at the same time. That superposition, they call that the coherent state, and it's been described by the people who are making these quantum computers is like trying to balance a marble on top of a pin during the middle of an earthquake, because it is so affected by the environment and outside forces that as soon as you allow it to actually manifest and be real, something will disrupt it ever so slightly, and then suddenly it's not real anymore. It
Hmm.
doesn't exist. It does what they call um, uh, decoherence. It literally evaporates to nothing, and they don't know where it goes. And they're trying to create this in a stable environment, which is why they have these things, these supercomputers and these quantum computers at really ridiculously low temperatures, like 437 degrees below zero kind of stuff, because the atomic movement becomes less so. You literally can freeze atoms and electrons at that temperature. So they're able to make things not move so they can actually create these informational qubits. Um, did you watch that video I sent you to, by the way?
I did not do my homework on that. I'm sorry. I got
Well,
sidetracked. I was gonna watch it, and then I ended up watching the video on JOTT
you should have known it
Phenomenon.
was going to come up. You know,
I
essentially,
know. I want
essentially,
to
what
watch
they
it.
discovered is that science has been doing it all wrong, trying to create this superposition, quantum physics. Nature figured it out a long time ago, and every living form of nature did it in an environment that was messy and wet and um, completely chaotic. It actually created an environment where quantum qubits could be processed in living things, in living cells. And two Nobel uh, scientists, confirmed not only does it happen, but it's real. And they're winning all kinds of prizes because they essentially figured out how to get quantum computers to work by using biology instead of weird metals and weird um, processes like freezing quantum computers to sub-zero temperatures, because plants can actually process quantum information right in the leaves, and every living thing is interconnected on that quantum level through that process of biology. So we are essentially quantum computers. As I have said for decades now, our brain is the only real quantum computer that actually exists. Turns out that I was wrong. It is our whole, every part of your body, every living cell in your body is part of a quantum computer. And in that, you can, in theory, teleport yourself the way that you see things, go from one place to another with the right amount of informational matrixing. You could essentially teleport. You could essentially move faster than light from one location to another, in theory, because you already have all of that in you. Everything that's alive does.
I knew I had the Force. I know I'm going to be a Jedi one day.
I want to be the Jumper. Have you seen that movie?
Jen, what's your final thoughts on things? Let's get your final thoughts here, and so we can wrap things up.
Yeah, I think we all, at the end of the day, agree on the major basics of this, right? Because Josh, you're talking about how consciousness is required, and Kelly, you're talking about the spiritual aspect of it, and Stacy's over here talking about quantum computing, right? But at the end of the day, we all agree that unless we have some level of conscious awareness, none of it matters or exists, right? So it's all about being able to somehow document, quantify, observe these phenomena that are going on, whether it's through a computer program or a scientific test, or it's through one of our clairs and some type of ability, or it's through a video camera at a haunted location, or even just through personal experiences that grows people's awareness and changes their perspective, right? So at the end of the day, yeah, we know the cause. It's awareness, right?
Yeah, very well said. And on that note, guys, thank you all for being here tonight. Of course, all of our esteemed panel and everybody that watches this, whether it's now or on the replay. We always appreciate you. And if you want more of this content, remember, we are here every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And of course, all of our panel members, even our guest panel members, always have a link to come back anytime they choose and pop in on subjects that they may want to discuss. So we always welcome everybody back into the council all the time. We just try to maintain 4 to 10. But guys, thank you all so much. Remember, share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff that you guys know how to do. That keeps us in the algorithm. That keeps us getting that information out there to everybody. So if you got anything from this, hopefully share it to other people so they can get it. And for those spirits or that consciousness out there, I want that $200 back. Please have it back on my bed when I'm done with the show. All right. Thank you all, guys. We'll see you next week.
Peace.